Productivity Gladiator.
I'm Brian Nelson Palmer. On this show, I share personal, practical productivity skills that will make you more productive and advance your career. And in this episode, we're talking about team drama and how to fix it so it stops killing yours and your team's productivity. And with me on the show today is Joe Mull, who's a Hall of Fame leadership speaker and employee commitment expert, and happens to be the author of 3 books, including one called No More Team Drama, which kind of is a spoiler alert for why you're here, Joe. Thanks for being here.
Brian, I am delighted to be with you, and I am looking forward to the conversation. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And now, for those folks who aren't familiar with you and what you talk about, say a little more about how you're related to the team drama and how that kills your productivity that we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, I have spent nearly 20 years teaching leaders how to be better bosses and how to create the conditions at work for employees to thrive. So I nerd out on all the social science research around what leads employees to join an organization and stay long term and give it all they've got in the course of their work. And we know that leaders, managers, especially frontline and mid-level leaders, are probably the most influential factor in whether or not those conditions are being created. And so for years, as I've traveled the country and done that kind of training, that kind of leadership development work, whenever I would get into the room with leaders and we would start talking about the fires that they're putting out every day and the challenges that they face every day, I would constantly end up talking about team drama. And that's ultimately what led me to write my second book of that title.
Got it. Interesting. Okay. Well, I can't wait for this discussion with you. And you brought up that you talk about leadership. So the one thing I want to know too is there's a lot of people who are leadership speakers. So what would you say makes you different from all the other leadership speakers that, like, you listening might have already be familiar with? What makes Joe different?
I have spent a lot of years really zeroing in on what is probably the most important function for leaders in my estimation, which is, and I think I alluded to this a moment ago, understanding what the conditions are that lead people to thrive. I think that's the leader's primary job. I mean, let's take for a second, truly a leader's number one responsibility is to keep people safe. But after that, my job as a leader is to figure out what do these people need every day to be at their best, and then fight like crazy to create that for them. And so my work really centers around teaching leaders both the conditions and the conversations that lead to that employee commitment. So from a leadership development perspective, I'm not the guy that you bring in to teach your leaders how to do strategic planning. I'm the guy that you bring in to help you understand how to excel at the people side of leadership.
Got it. Very cool. Thanks for that. And wait, now, did I read online somewhere also that you founded Boss Hero School? Talk about that real quick.
That's right. That's like a perfect segue, Brian. You're a total pro. So Boss Hero School is a leadership masterclass that does exactly what I just described. It focuses on the conditions and the conversations that lead to employee commitment. So for years, as I would keynote or publish books or do our podcast or be brought into organizations to do leadership training, we would consistently get asked, hey, Joe, is there a place where we can send our leaders where you teach them how to be the kind of people-centered, values-driven, commitment-focused leaders that you speak and write about? And so after years of getting these kinds of requests, 2.5 years ago, we launched Boss Hero School, which is really zeroes in on, in the first part, a knowledge transfer. Let's give leaders a core operating system so that we understand what those conditions are that we have to create every day. So whether you're the manager at your local Dairy Queen or you're running a Fortune 500 company, if you understand what those conditions are, you can engineer them in your workplace. And then the second part of that experience is a skill development piece on the conversations that leaders need to learn how to have and need to deploy in their work in order to activate employee commitment. So we're teaching and training and practicing around things like giving feedback and coaching conversations and mentorship, because those are the interactions that ultimately create those conditions for commitment. So that's what Boss Hero School is all about.
Very cool. So it's a place you can actually go. Well, let's dive into our topic today. And first, I want to zoom out before we get into like solutions and stuff, because I'm obsessed with those. But I always like to take a second to zoom out. So zooming out first, when we talk about drama, I feel like Instagram and Facebook and social media and politics and all of that really paints a broad experience of what drama is. So can we, like, what exactly are we talking about here when we're talking about drama in the workplace?
Yeah.
Talk about that, Joe, and like, what are some examples?
Yeah. So the definition I have for team drama is that it is all of the actions and the reactions that damage relationships, morale, and culture in the workplace. And whenever I talk about this in rooms full of leaders, I get the examples from them. And every single leader listening to this conversation immediately thought of something when they heard that turn of phrase, team drama. And so if a leader was sitting with us right now and we were having coffee and I said, what do you think of when you think of team drama? I'm going to hear things like gossip and cliques and infighting and backbiting. It's all the stuff that it's all the ways in which members of teams interact with each other in a way that seems to do harm. And when you go out and do all the kinds of leadership development work that I've been doing over the past couple of years, and you say, what are the things that derail your time, your energy, your attention? We hear a lot about these kinds of things of team drama. And so it's all those actions and those reactions, those moments that occur at work between people that inflict damage on our relationships, on the culture of the organization, and on the morale of the people that are there. And so then, like downstream, we know those have an impact on everything that you care about as a leader and as a business owner, right? They have an impact on retention, employee engagement, on revenue, on reputation, on customer experience. Because you've probably had the experience, Brian, where you've walked into a place of business somewhere and you can tell there's some tension or some conflict or some team drama taking place between members of that team.
For sure. And for you listening, I know, like Joe said, something probably came to mind. But Joe, can you toss in a few more examples? We're going to look at it from two perspectives. I want to look at it from the individual contributor level, because you ultimately have a job and you need to deliver whatever level of leadership you are, you need to deliver yourself. And then you also have a team potentially that's underneath you or that you work on. So Joe, if it doesn't immediately come to mind, if the person listening is going, well, I don't know that I have a lot of team drama. I'm pretty like, what does this actually look like? Do you have some examples for the individual and for the manager?
Well, beyond the gossip and cliques and infighting, which tend to be the kind of first answers that people think of, there's some very granular things that can happen with people and on teams in the workplace. So, for example, when I refer to what's called smack roll sigh, which is something that we've all experienced, even if that's not what you know that it's called. But smack roll sigh is when somebody goes like this. They roll their eyes and they smack their lips and they
Smack
sigh,
roll
right?
sigh.
Smack
Okay,
roll
got
sigh.
it.
It's the
Yes.
physical manifestation of our irritation or our unhappiness with something that somebody else said or did. And it usually shows up right after somebody leaves the room. We've all probably done a smack roll sigh, and we've all probably been a target of a smack roll sigh after we have left a room. And it's a very kind of granular way that team drama can show itself. Another example is what I call scorekeeping. If you've been leading a team and you've ever had a scorekeeper, right? It's that person who comes up to you all the time as the manager and says, hey, so-and-so's not pulling their weight, or I'm doing so much more than everybody else. And if you think about it, the mentality of the scorekeeper, it's a little bit absurd, because if they were so darn busy, how do they have time to keep track of what everybody else is doing? But we see that behavior, and it shows up in the judgments that those folks make, and then the expectations that they have for what they should or should not be getting from their teammates, and how their boss should or should not be managing other people. And so that's a form of team drama. One of my other favorites is what I had a leader refer to me one time as chur, 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 chur. And she did this little hand gesture for your listeners who are watching on video that looks like the chicken dance, right? These little kind of chirping hands next to our ears. I was facilitating a staff development program for a small business, and just for the leadership team. And I said, what are the kinds of team drama that you experience that you find frustrating? And this leader said, I'm sick and tired of chur, 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 chur. And I said, what's that? And she said, well, I'll have a meeting or a huddle, and I'll share information with my team, and I will try to get them to ask questions or get their input, and nobody says a word until I'm 3 steps down the hallway, and then 7 of my 8 members are in a corner in a quiet circle, chur, 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 gossiping with one another. And I said, oh, you're talking about the meeting after the meeting. And so that's a type of team drama that we see in the workplace as well.
Yep. If you've ever been in a meeting and then you get the offline chat from somebody, if you're like, if you Zoom or Teams chat or any of that, and you got side conversations happening in the chat,
Yep.
That
Or
is.
text. Yep.
Or text, exactly,
Yep.
because you don't want it to interrupt the yes. Oh my gosh. All right, I'm seeing it now. I gotcha. And talk about. I mean, you wrote this book on no more team drama and stuff, but I'm curious in the research, like what. So this show's about productivity, not about drama necessarily, but there's a cost
Yeah.
to all of this drama, which is why we're talking about this. So, what do you have some numbers or some metric? Like, what does this actually cost in terms of productivity?
We could spend the next hour talking about just this and about all the different numbers and all the different costs and all the different ways. And you can look at it through the lens of productivity and time and reputation and customer experience. I'm good friends with a drama researcher and speaker named Cy Wakeman, who is brilliant in this space. And she's found in her work that the average employee spends 2 hours and 20 minutes per day in drama and emotional waste. And we know that leaders tend to spend at least 5 hours a week on average managing that drama. And it wasn't that long ago that SHRM came out and had a study a few quarters back as part of their civility index, where they indicated that organizations have lost nearly $3 billion per day in reduced productivity and absenteeism caused by drama and workplace incivility. And that number just keeps going up every quarter. It goes up a couple of $100 million every quarter. We also know, and this was data that I was seeing in my most recent book, Employalty, about why people leave organizations or why they stay. And there's a ton of data that tells us that about 20% of employees, 1 out of 5, will leave a job due to what they describe as a toxic team culture. And so that becomes a turnover cost in the hundreds of billions of dollars. And so it's interesting, Brian, when we talk about this at that kind of global or national level, it almost feels to me like those numbers are too big to get our heads around, right? So
Right.
ask the average manager, how much time do you spend dealing with drama each week? And they will talk about it in terms of hours. And you can do some back of the napkin math here, right? Where you figure out, okay, if I've got a manager who's spending 4 or 5 hours a week in my organization dealing with drama, and they're doing that 52 weeks a year, and I've got 40 managers in my organization, even in the smallest organizations, you can be talking about $250,000 or $500,000 a year problem.
Seriously. Yeah. A lot of well, and that segues right into if you haven't already done the back of the napkin math that Joe's talking about here, I did a TED talk on the value of your time, and I have a calculator on my site. I'll include it in the episode notes here if you haven't already done this, because you're just tuning in for the first time for this episode. I have a calculator that tells you what your time is worth at work and at home, and it gives you a dollar per hour figure. And so you think about what Joe just said on how many hours do you personally spend or your team spend on this, and times that by the number that you get from my calculator, which takes 5 seconds. That's really interesting, Joe, about I didn't realize it was 5 hours a week. Like 5 hours a week is not an insignificant, like imagine if you had 5 more hours of time. Like I know what I would do with that, because I'm really busy right now. So like 5 hours would be amazing. That's an afternoon. I could have a whole afternoon. Wow.
Yeah. And that number was really only zeroed in on the managers. If that manager is standing in their office talking to the employee about the drama, we just doubled it.
Yeah, right.
Now we're taking the employee's time too.
Now the employee's time too, for sure. Okay. As much as I would love to spend hours talking about the numbers, I'm a solutions guy. So let's get practical and let's kind of zoom in a little bit. So start with the individual first. What are the biggest mistakes you're seeing people make in the drama department, and or what should they do instead? Kind of zoom in for us, Joe.
Yeah. So I'm going to give you 2 very specific behaviors that we know are problematic and that just continue to perpetuate team drama. One of them is what I call judgy gossip. And judgy gossip is where you go to a peer or a confidant in the organization when you're upset about something, or you're frustrated about something, or you just have some scuttlebutt and some news to share about something that you heard or that somebody else maybe observed. And we know it's sort of human nature that this gives us a dopamine hit, because it's nice to be included in the scuttlebutt. It's nice to be seen as being in the know. And when we take our judgment or observation to another person and they validate it for us, it makes us feel observant. It makes us feel wise. But everything about that interaction is a colossal waste of time. And over time, it actually does harm, because we create what are called drama triangles. And we'll get a little bit more into this in a few minutes, I think. But when you have those kinds of interactions where two people on the team are talking about a third person on the team, what happens when the third person on the team finds out about that conversation? Well, they go to their confidant. They go to their peer and they say, hey, do you believe that so-and-so and what's her name are over here talking about me? And so we end up kind of connecting and creating these webs of drama in organizations that do harm to productivity, that do harm to reputation, that do harm to that sense of team morale and camaraderie and connection that, when it's right, lead teams to all be rowing in the same direction together and do things well together. Now, as a caveat to this, Brian, I do want to mention that what I call processing gossip is actually healthy. So the difference here is, if I go to a coworker and I say, hey, do you believe that so-and-so said this? That's judgy gossip, because I'm just being judgmental and I'm wanting to play with my colleague. But if I go to you, if you and I work together and I go to you and I say, hey, Brian, I just had this interaction with Sharon and it's bothering me and I'm really honked off. Can you process this with me? Can we talk about this? Can you do like a check with me to make sure I'm not overreacting? Those are actually pretty healthy behaviors, because maybe what I'm trying to do is make sure that I'm not jumping to a conclusion, or make sure that if I need to go have a conversation with Sharon, that I'm not missing something or thinking about this in the wrong way. So let's distinguish between that kind of judgy gossip and that processing gossip, which is.
I think you just nailed it. My follow-up was going to be, so what should you do instead without judgy gossip? And I feel like you just gave the answer to the test question there, which is okay, but processing is good. And I think it's important that when the way that you just phrased it, what I heard was that you weren't taking sides. The first version, the judgy gossip, sounds like I'm trying to find out if you're going to be my ally or if you're on Team Sharon. Yeah. And now we're picking sides and we're about to start a battle. Whereas if it's a processing thing, like, there is a productivity factor here, which is, if what Sharon said about me is true and it's detrimental to the team somehow, it's good that you asked. It's good that we process it. And if you need to apologize so we can move on, that seems way more productive in terms of handling that. So I'm following you there. That makes a lot of sense.
Well, and you just teed me up beautifully for the second kind of specific, practical productivity killing mistake that we see, which is avoiding uncomfortable conversations. Because in the scenario that we're talking about here, the right thing for me to do, if Sharon said or did something that I don't understand or that's bothering me, is to go and talk to Sharon about it, is to go to her and say, hey, this happened. It's bothering me. I'm having a reaction. Can you and I sit down and talk about this? But we rarely give even adults the skills to be able to do this. And because we know that it is much easier to seek out the comfort of validation than it is to step into the discomfort of confrontation, we will always go looking for that other person to tell us that we're right, instead of going to the person to say, can you help me understand this better? Because I'm having this reaction. And so that's the second productivity killing drama mistake, is that we avoid these uncomfortable conversations. And that can be true for leaders, for managers, right? They often aren't always given the skills, given the chance to develop a higher degree of comfort with going to someone and saying, like, hey, we got to talk about this a little bit. And we don't necessarily take the time to teach members of the team how to have those conversations. But if we do, you can dramatically cut down on the amount of team drama that takes place.
Gosh, yes. And when it comes to the crucial conversations, I think everyone, and definitely you listening and watching, me personally, I know, Joe, for you, it is easier to avoid. It is so much easier to just not engage. So at what point, and I'm going to transparently, in my marriage, this is something that I've learned over the years, is that, I don't need to have every battle. Mm-hmm. Sometimes if I wait till tomorrow, it's actually not something that I even need to address. I was a little fuming at the moment. I was a little riled up at the moment. But by the time I get to tomorrow and I look back at it, I'm like, I just don't even care anymore. Yeah. But if it's still bothering me, then I know that that's when I need to have the conversation with Sharon that we were talking about. Would you agree with that? Am I off there? Do you have a different advice on, like, when do you just let it sit and not engage, and when should you engage?
No, I'm with you on that. I think when we take time to think about what we know and understand about how our brains work and how and where emotions come from, right? We know that we've got these two levels of processing in our brain. We've got that fast system and that slow system. And I think a lot of the folks that are listening have probably read, Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman, which is just an incredible book about understanding this distinction that you're talking about here. That when things happen, our first blush reaction is kind of this lizard brain, which is this emotional reaction. And then with a little bit of time, that emotional reaction gets processed at a deeper level of thinking, which sets us up to then later have a response instead of a reaction. And so I coach leaders all the time that you're not wrong to be mad at work. If somebody says or does something that upsets you, you're a human being. You're allowed to be mad. You're allowed to get, dare I say, pissed, right? You're allowed to have strong reactions to things. What matters is what you do with it. And so the best thing for you to do, if somebody drops the ball at work, we want you to address it when the ball is on the ground, right? It's not helpful or healthy to go to a member of your team and say, hey, 3 weeks ago, this happened and it was a problem. Like we need to have those conversations in a timely manner.
Yeah.
But we also need to have responses and not reactions. So go home, have a glass of wine, take a couple of deep breaths, let that emotional reaction burn itself off a little bit. And then when you come in the next day and you can sit down with that person, you're going to have a much more thoughtful, careful response and be a little bit more intentional about how you address it than you would be if you just gave yourself permission to react.
Makes perfect sense. If it's bothering you, write it down. And I love what you said, Joe. There's a book called 1 Minute Manager that talks about you should address it at the time, like immediate positive reinforcement, but also immediate, no, that's wrong. We need to fix that. That helps the feedback loop. That fast feedback loop is really good. And when it's an emotional reaction for you, write down the emotion, write it. What is it bothering you? Whatever it is. And if it's still bothering you the next day, you can go back to what you wrote. You can compose that thought a little more organized. And hey, pro move, ChatGPT is really good at digesting stuff like this. So if you haven't ever tried digesting your emotions with AI, these days everybody's doing it. Try it. But ultimately, in terms of getting your thoughts into a constructive conversation that you could have with someone, that digestion, if it's still bothering you the next day, that's when maybe it's worth addressing the emotion as opposed to the situation. So I don't know.
I will push back just slightly on one thing that you said, and it's sort of a mini caveat inside of it. And that is when we're using AI tools to process our feelings and emotions, we have to remember that they are built to be sycophantic. They are built to tell us that we're right. And so they're going to, by default, validate our emotions. And they may miss the challenges that we need to pose to ourselves to break down assumptions we are making. So one of the things that we coach around in this book, No More Team Drama, is that if we find ourselves in a situation where we're frustrated with somebody else's behavior or actions or attitude, that we sometimes have to take a step back and say, what would make a good person act this way? Is my brain making up a story and there are some shortcuts our brains take every day that assume bad intent and assume character flaws in other people. And that actually leads to a lot of team drama. And ChatGPT is not always going to ask that question. ChatGPT is hardwired to say, you're right, this is a problem. And so if we have to go into those conversations with those tools, knowing that.
Yes. And I will say, if you haven't ever role played, I use AI a lot to role play on how would you react to this? Because it will tell the negative of the other person. And to your point, like it likes that because then it gets to have a personality and it's not telling you you're bad, but it's telling you what it thinks about the other. So like if you haven't ever role played with AI before, that would be a new skill. I encourage you to try it because it helps you look at a situation from multiple perspectives. I like that. So let's take it up a level now. That was some of the individual stuff that you were talking about. And then is there anything you would add from the manager perspective, now if you're the manager of the team, it's not just you personally, what, the mistakes that you see people make, and what should they do instead?
I think one of the biggest mistakes that leaders can consistently make is feeling like that their job when team drama is taking place is to be entirely reactive and to think about, how do I address it when it happens? And so this sort of mental orientation just leaves that leader in a position to always be putting out fires. The leader's job, if they really want to cut down on team drama, is to think about, how do I proactively prevent it from happening in the first place? And so that means that as a leader, I am thinking about, how do I create a culture where people treat each other with courtesy and respect? How do I create a culture where everybody understands and agrees to a set of basic rules about how we're going to treat each other, how we're going to talk to each other when we disagree? We as leaders have to take ownership for teaching members of our teams, not just what those expectations are, but how to do it. I think a lot of leaders have had the experience where somebody comes into their office and they says, "Hey, I'm really frustrated with so-and-so, and I'm done with so-and-so, and I'm tired of them doing this, and you got to fix it." And if we've done some work as a leader to create a culture where members of a team understand that if they're upset with someone, that you go to that person, then the manager is empowered in that moment to say, "Hold on, time out. How did the conversation go, Brian, when you went to so-and-so? Oh, well, I don't want to rock the boat. I don't want to get involved in all that." If you do some proactive work around a staff agreement where you talk to your team about, hey, how do we want to handle it when conflict rears its ugly head? How do we want to handle that? Here's an interesting game to play with your team. Pull everybody together and say, hey, if somebody is upset with you over something that you said or did, what do you want their first step to be? Do you want it to be coming to me as the boss and talking to me about it? To a person, everybody on the team is going to say no. If you've got a problem with me, if you're upset with something I said or did, then bring it to me. I want that to be the first step. So then you as a leader get to say, great. Can we all agree on that? Yes. Congratulations. You all just agreed that you have to go the other way, right? That if you're upset with something that somebody said or did, your first step is not going to be go to your buddy. Your first step is not going to be to make snide remarks. Your first step is not going to be to come to me and complain. It's going to be to go to that person and say, hey, this happened. It's bothering me. Let's talk about it. And so when everybody sets those expectations and is operating from that common framework, when that employee walks into your office and says, I'm done with so-and-so, and you say to them, have you had the conversation? And they say, no, you get to do two things in that moment as a leader. The first is you get to say, hey, hold on a minute. You agreed to this. We agreed that if these kinds of things were happening, that we were going to go to each other. You stood in front of your teammates and said that's how you would handle it. If you don't do that in this moment, how are those folks going to be able to trust you again? And that's powerful. The second thing you get to do as a leader is you can say, now, sit down. Let's talk about how that conversation is going to go. What are you going to say? Let's role play it. Let's get you ready to approach that conversation in the healthiest way possible so that you can leave here and go and have it and handle it in the healthiest, most adult way possible.
Absolutely. I love that. And one thing that you're kind of hitting on here, Joe, that's a sort of an anecdote that I have for you listening or you watching is I describe them as volcanoes. These people, my family had it. My dad was kind of I'll call him out. This might be oversharing. Don't judge me, but my dad was a bit of a volcano, and
so was mine. I know exactly what you're talking about. Mm-hmm.
And what happens is everything's fine. Something would bother him, and it's fine. Everything's good on the surface of the volcano. Nothing's happening. It's all good. Everything's fine. Everything's fine. But the pressure is just building. And it's so frustrated, but you're not venting any of it. You're not letting it out. So then you build it up and you build it up. Yeah. So venting it, having the conversation that Joe just said about you got to share the thing. You have to address the thing, especially if it's still bothering you the next day. Like we just talked about it, write it down. If it's still bothering you, you got to let it go, because then when you address it, you can let it go. And then you're not building up the thing so that you're going to explode like a volcano. Don't do that. So oh my gosh, this is such a healthier thing. And as a manager, facilitating those discussions so that your team is not constantly, everything's fine. That's going to be really helpful.
100%.
What about any other thoughts on that was super productive. All right. So managers should be encouraging the conversations to happen, setting it up so that their team understands they should be happening. What else? Any other thoughts for the manager there?
I think the manager in those moments too, one of my favorite sort of scripts or questions to coach managers on when somebody comes into your office and wants to complain about something or somebody else, we as leaders can often jump right to fixer mode and that we're going to jump in and we're going to fix it, or we need to have the answer. And that is not always what people want. And so sometimes just when somebody comes into the office with a frustration or a complaint, it can be really powerful in that moment to say, are you asking me to help you fix it, or are you just here to vent? Because when you ask people and you frame it that way and you give them two choices, you might be surprised at the number of times a member of the team says, I'm just here to vent. And then you, as the leader, can define what healthy venting looks like, which is like, okay, great. I've got 2.5 minutes before my next meeting. I'm not trying to be abrupt or cut you short, but go ahead, let it fly. Let's hear it. And then they can let it out. And it's like, okay, do you feel a little bit better? Yep. Okay. And maybe there's a coaching opportunity in that moment, right? To ask some open-ended questions to help that person sort through what they know and what they think and what they feel. And they can leave that interaction feeling a little bit better about unloading that. And then as the leader, you don't have to take ownership for fixing it. You're not accountable for fixing it. And you don't turn yourself into that sort of a bundle of response and, okay, here's another fire that I have to put out just by asking that question.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's almost like the magic words, by the way, the 3 magical words. If somebody comes in and they are charged up and they have something and they start with you and they're like, oh my God, they're like so up there. There are 3 magic words. Tell me more. Mm-hmm. You don't have to say anything else. You probably need more information. You don't have to jump right in and come up to their level. You don't have to jump on the bus with them if they're on a bus going somewhere you don't want to go, but you probably need more information. And so that just reminds me of the tell me more thing. That's good, Joe. What about the stay out of it mentality? I feel like sometimes there's a big with drama. And so, we talked about avoidance earlier for the individual, but now as a manager, sometimes I don't know if you ever watched Friends. My family was a big Friends watcher, and Monica's closet was a thing. If you've never seen it, it's where Monica has that closet where she just throws everything and it's not organized. And I feel like sometimes with drama, there's a Monica's closet mentality where it's like, no, just don't. I'm a leader. I don't want to be involved. I can't be involved. La, 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 la. So talk about that. How do you avoid, when is it good to stay out of it? When is it not good to stay out of it? What are the things you can see?
I think if we recognize as leaders that one of our fundamental obligations is to coach people through moments and through challenges, then we're not allowed to get away with that, right? And that kind of stay out of it mentality operates at a couple different levels. And sometimes it's happening because the leader's uncomfortable with conflict and they're uncomfortable with maybe not knowing how to help others resolve it. And so that's a professional development and a leadership development challenge that person needs to take on for themselves, to develop the skills and the knowledge to learn how to help people navigate conflict in the workplace. And we all know what happens if you keep lifting up the rug and sweeping the dirt underneath the rug. You end up getting a really big mess there, and eventually somebody's going to trip over it, and all of a sudden you're going to have an even bigger mess on your hands. The other side of that, though, is let's say we have that manager who does some of what we just talked about, Brian, right? They put in a little bit of work to pull the team together and say, how are we going to handle conflict when it arises? And what are we going to do? And how are we going to talk to each other? Okay, now go and do that. If the manager then goes like this and says, well, I told them what to do, and they try to wash their hands of it, just because you did that proactive work doesn't absolve you of the guidance and the coaching and the mentoring that people might need to step into the discomfort of some of those conversations. And so that's where staying out of it isn't necessarily healthy. It's healthy to set those expectations and teach people and give them the skills. And it's healthy to challenge them to step into those conversations without you early. But if those issues aren't getting resolved, then you might have to step in and assist.
And when you step in and assist, I feel like sometimes it becomes a referee situation. And oftentimes, if you're in a referee situation, sometimes that means HR might need to be involved if we're in a referee situation or something like that. So do you have any advice for sort of the addressing team drama without becoming the office referee or making things worse? Or is that just kind of circling the same stuff we've already said?
Well, the proactive work is the same, because if you set the core values and the expectations, and you teach people how to give each other feedback, and you teach people how to break down assumptions, and you define those healthy behaviors for resolving conflict, then you can keep pointing to them and asking people to embrace them, especially if you've got two people who are just oil and water and they maybe are frustrated with each other or don't get along. But every once in a while, you do get people in the workplace where the conflict runs deeper than that. And so there are times when a leader might need to mediate. And there's plenty of resources in the world around what that healthy mediation looks like. But at the core of it is sitting down with two people and saying, hey, this can't continue as it is. We need to open up some lines of communication to figure out if and how we can coexist, and to ensure that everybody involved is showing up in a way that is not doing harm to our team, to our culture, to our workflows, to our productivity, to our customer experience. And sometimes you get there and sometimes you don't. And if you don't, then it's that changes the conversation, right? At least you have clarity. Okay, we're not going to resolve this. If both parties stay the same, if both parties stay, then we have some potential harm. So we need to figure out an exit plan for some or both. But most of the time, what ends up happening is the leader sits down and does some basic mediation rules of saying, I need you to talk to each other. I need you to use I statements. I need you to restate what you're hearing from the other person. And we're going to start to work through this together. And, the doing this well requires some subtlety and some nuance. I was at a conference a couple of years ago where a leader on stage bragged about how when two people on the team aren't getting along, if one of them walks into her office and starts talking about the other, that leader goes, hold on, walks out to the cubicle farm, gets the person that was the subject of the complaint, brings them into the office, sets them down in the chair and says, Sharon came in here to complain about you and had some other things to say, and I thought maybe you should hear it. Which sounds sort of like guerrilla leadership, but that's not the healthiest way to go about it, right? There's a difference between saying to Sharon, hey, I understand you're frustrated with so-and-so. You understand that we're going to have a conversation with so-and-so at some point in order to move past this. That's a different and more a proactive level of healthy for mediating those kinds of situations.
Yeah. This all centers around conflict, right? We've got conflict, and then there's unhealthy conflict and healthy conflict. So I think you talk about moving from unhealthy to healthy conflict. So can you dig into that a little bit?
Yeah. So unhealthy conflict is that drama triangle that I talked about, which is where instead of going to the person, you go to another. And that person in the models is often referred to as the rescuer. Right? They believe that their participation in that conversation is altruistic, right? My coworker needs my support. They need my ear. They need my advice. And none of that's true. That's bunk. They're there because it's good to be included in the scuttlebutt. And I'm kind of just a little bit glad that it's not about me. I'm not the person being talked about. And then we get that dopamine hit that we talked about. So that's the unhealthy conflict model. The healthy conflict model, which we've talked about a little bit here, is when someone says or does something that you don't understand or that you don't agree with, you go to that person and you sit down with them, and you've taken the time. If you're having a big reaction to it, an emotional reaction to it, you've taken that time to gather yourself. Maybe you need to wait a day or two, and then you sit down and you say, this happened. This is bothering me. I want to talk with you about it. And maybe even before that conversation, you've done some work to challenge your own assumptions. One of the things that we talk about to really disrupt team drama is to teach people, whenever possible, to assume good intent. Now, that does not mean ignoring bad behavior, but that means to assume good intent. What would make a good person act this way? Okay, this person has been late 4 times this week. Maybe they're lazy. Maybe they don't care. Maybe they're a poor planner. Maybe they don't care about the impact that their schedule has on everybody else. That might be true. That could be the story. But what else could it be? What would make a good person act this way? And then sometimes we get to the place where we think maybe they got something going on at home that's keeping them from getting out the door this week. Maybe they're dealing with an illness. Maybe the bus schedule has changed and there's something that's preventing them from getting here on time. And we become a more forgiving and more collaborative human being when we take that moment to ask ourselves those questions and to try to step closer to the circumstances that might be leading someone to show up in a way that others are judging. And so we have to especially as leaders, we have to teach people how to engage in that thinking and that deconstruction of assumptions that sometimes pop into our heads and that our brain wants to treat as fact.
Got it. So would I be oversimplifying, or do I miss it? What I hear is kind of two perspectives. I hear a healthy conflict as direct conversation with someone in a civilized way, and or putting yourself in their shoes to try to figure out, okay, trying to understand where they're coming from. An unhealthy conflict would be jumping to conclusions and or pulling in other people that is not a productive way, like just to gossip or pick sides or something like that. Is that,
absolutely?
Did I miss it, or is that oversimplified, or is that pretty accurate?
It's not oversimplified. And I probably left out a really important ingredient of this though, Brian, which is that we also have to teach the person on the receiving end of that conversation how to hear it, how to receive it, right? So if I come to you and I say, hey, Brian, this is happening and it's bothering me and I want to talk to you about it. And you say, okay. And I tell you the story of what I observed and what my reaction is. And I say, hey, can you help me understand? And you say, brother, you are full of you know what. And let's say you dismiss me. Or what actually happens is, so let's put this into a very specific context. Let's say you've sent an email to the team that I thought was crappy, that I thought was inappropriate or mean-spirited, or there's something about the tone or the email that you sent to the team that I have a problem with. So I come to you and I say, hey, Brian, this email, this bothered me. I'm having a reaction to it. I need you to understand how this landed. And you say to me, okay, well, I don't know what you want me to do. We have a lot going on. I had to put all of that in that one email because I wanted to make sure we were being efficient. This all needs to get done by the end of the week or the client's going to be upset. That's just like, sometimes people just need to get a thicker skin, man, and do what needs to be done. So all you have done, in addition to dismissing my concern, is that you defended your intent. And this is what happens when we go to somebody and say, nobody likes to be told that they're not perfect, right? Nobody likes to have somebody come to them and say, hey, you did something that I'm struggling with. And so our first instinct as a human being is to defend our intent, is to say, well, what I was trying to do was this. And even a good intent doesn't absolve us of a negative impact. And so we have to teach people on teams to be able to acknowledge, okay, well, my intent was this, but I have to own that the impact was that, even if I don't necessarily agree that people should respond that way. That opens up to managing conflict in a healthier way.
Yep. That makes sense. At what point do you stop tolerating? If in that scenario we've talked about where it's like, well, that didn't go anywhere, and then you do it again. If it happens a second time or then even a third time, then like at what point do you bring in the boss? At what point do you bring in HR? Like, what does the escalation path of that look like? Because the worst would be having to just continues to go nowhere. That would be frustrating and make me want to leave. So what does that look like?
I think it's when you move from there being an incident to being a pattern, especially if you've addressed incidents, plural, and then no change has occurred, then that might be the time to ask for some help. Sure.
Got it. So like a 3 strikes, you're out. If it happens once, that's an incident. If it happens 2, okay, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me, whatever. But if we're at 3 times now that's a pattern. And is that sort of an easy like way to think about it?
I would probably push back on that a little bit depending on the severity of the behavior, because there are some behaviors in the workplace that one time is too many, right? If we're talking about bullying or harassment or, some inappropriate behaviors in the workplace, behaviors where there's policies in the handbook that say these things aren't okay, right? Then you got to have conversations with third parties right from the jump.
Yes, true. Good point. If it's a violation of a handbook thing and or you're reacting to it in that way, okay, I kind of see the line. That makes sense. And the other thing that came up for me, Joe, as I was listening to you is all this stuff, all these, I grew up in the era of sports where they said, walk it off.
Yeah.
And so like all this sounds like it would take so much time to be that understanding and have these conversations, and like, isn't it easier to just say walk it off? And like, it seems like it would be faster just to like just let it go. Like, I don't know, what are your thoughts on the amount of time? Is that a misconception in terms of how much time this takes?
Absolutely. I think it's a misconception, because we are having these interactions anyway. We're having the interactions anyway. People are either coming up to us to complain, and in that moment, we're either telling them what to do in reference to work that hasn't happened, or we can point to the work that has happened. And so pulling your team together once a quarter to talk about how are we going to handle conflict, that's a 15-minute conversation. It doesn't have to be a 2-day team retreat. Having in those moments a couple of coaching questions at the ready as a leader to say, yeah, you're right, Sharon might be lazy and not care. That could be true. But, maybe it's not. What would make a good person act that way? What if Sharon had a completely legitimate reason for this? What could that legitimate reason be? Let's talk about that. I mean, that conversation, that fire that you're putting out with that moment and that person's drama, it's just going to sound different. It's not new time.
Yeah. It's the ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure.
Mm-hmm.
And like, if you think that this is going to take too much time, then just wait till HR gets involved, and just wait until the alternative is not better. So no, don't take the ostrich approach and put your head in the sand and la, 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 la.
Mm-hmm.
And like, no, it's good to do this now, because this is your team's productivity. And if your team's got drama going on and you got drama going on, it's going to affect your ability to get the job done. And these days right now, people are paying attention to that.
Yep.
That stuff.
But also the other side of that is that not every disagreement is legitimate. If I come to you and I say, hey, you had this reaction and it's bothering me, and we need to resolve it and we should talk about it and you should apologize to me, and what you actually did was hold me accountable for something or made a decision that I don't agree with, that doesn't mean you were wrong. Sometimes we have reactions to things because we don't like the way they made us feel. That doesn't mean they were wrong. And so sometimes in the moment as leaders, we need to coach people through that. We need to coach people through, okay, was this really inappropriate, or are you just unhappy? Because you're allowed to feel unhappy, but that doesn't mean it was wrong. And that's a coaching conversation.
True. And the difference between your feelings and right and wrong are two different things. Mm-hmm. That's a good differentiator right there. The way that you feel about the drama versus whether the drama is right and wrong are two different things. And it could be that it's just a sucky situation and both parties are right, and you're just going to have to move past it. And so you're going to have to deal with the feelings. They're going to have to deal with the feelings. You're going to have to understand each other's feelings, but nobody was wrong per se.
Right.
So maybe it's not an apology because you were wrong. Sometimes, and if you've been in a relationship, you've been through this where you said something and you weren't wrong. Mm-hmm. And yet you're going to apologize for how they feel and how the intent that came across was not right. And so that I draw those comparisons because to me, those are things that I see in multiple parts of my life personally that are like, ooh, that happened with my friend, that happened with my spouse, that happened with my coworker, that happened with my client, that happened, that stuff happens. And so, that's a good one. Can you share a story, like a success story of maybe a team that eliminated drama and the productivity difference there?
I've done workshops and training with teams of all sizes over the years. And the story that shows up again and again and again is usually about what I call pulling a weed. And so when I'm talking about team drama, we ultimately will get to a conversation about how some people are just not capable of showing up in the ways that you and I have been sitting here and talking about for the past 50 minutes. There are some people who like to gin up drama. There are some people who like to burn the fire of gossip. There are some people who just are not capable of assuming good intent and going to the source and being self-aware and having those conversations. And, when I ask members of teams who call me and say, hey, we've got a lot of team drama here, we're dealing with a lot of dysfunction, one of the first questions I will ask is there one person on your team right now, or maybe two, who if they left today and never came back, most of this drama would go away? And believe it or not, Brian, the answer is almost always yes. And so then they start telling me story after story after story about this person who has just been a bad actor for a long time and all the ways they've tried to address it, but they're still there because, well, they're a really good front desk person, or they're a really good accountant, or they're a really good nurse. And I have to challenge them on that to say, hold on, are they a really good nurse, or are they just clinically competent? But they're lacking this whole other set of interpersonal skills about what it means to be a good, adaptable teammate and be a good fit for our team and our culture. Because if that's true, then what you've got is a weed in your garden. And there's no amount of oxygen or CO2 or fertilizer and water that's going to turn that weed into a beautiful, thriving plant. And there's only one way to deal with a weed, and that is that you have to pull it. And so the stories I get, the success stories that I hear all the time after I do my No More Team Drama keynote at a conference or after somebody reads the book, I get calls and emails all the time from people who say, guess what? We pulled a weed. Oh my goodness. What a difference it has made. Almost immediately, I was working with an organization that had 2 locations, and they had a weed in their garden. And when they were telling me story after story after story of this person, they told me that this person had been working there for 14 years and they had been a problem for 14 years. And I said, if you know that they're doing harm, why are they still here? And the owner of the business raised her hand and said, that's on me. That's my fault, because this person has worked for me for so long that I cannot imagine them not being here. And I just don't know that I have the courage. And she used that word, courage, to pull the weed. Well, a few months later, something interesting happened. That toxic employee went out on an FMLA leave and they were gone for 4 months. And that's when the owner of the business saw it. They had a completely different team dynamic, a completely different workplace, and everything went back to bad when that person returned. And so sure enough, 9 months later, I got a call from the business owner. She said, I did it. I pulled the weed, and it's a night and day difference.
Wow. That makes perfect sense. And Joe, I feel like you just slipped me a bill of goods, because what you just did is share the success story where you fired the problem.
Yeah.
And everything that we've talked about up to now has been constructive conflict, talking with people. And so I want another story. You have to tell me another, because on the one hand, I agree with that. Yes, you should if it's a problem, it's always going to be a problem. Most people in their gut know that it's a problem, but they try to avoid it. And I do agree that if the team dynamic is not getting better, then you might have to make a change, and change is hard. And managers who don't like conflict really don't like getting rid of people. So like, I want to honor everything that you just said. And wait a minute, we can't just share the only success story we share is that nope, you fire and it's all better. Like, hold on, stop it. Try that again.
Well, I mean, so it's a continuum. It's a continuum of the work that we need to do as leaders to help teams become high-performing, close-knit, no-drama work groups. And so all of the things that we've been talking about here, it's not, I work with a lot of doctors, and doctors really want to treat everything like a disease. What's the diagnosis? What's the treatment? Now it's a cure. And team cohesion doesn't work that way. Team cohesion is like going to the gym. You have to keep going to stay healthy. And so all the things that we've been talking about here, the teaching teams how to resolve conflict in a healthy way, teaching teams how to build camaraderie, these are all things that we have to do on a rolling, regular, ongoing basis. And over time, if you identify someone who is not capable of doing that, then yes, you have to pull the weed. But the success stories that you're looking for are granular. It's the leader who learned to ask that question of, are you here to have me help you fix it? Or are you just here to vent? And say, wow, I asked that a few times and I'm having different conversations. It's the leader who says, we did the staff agreement exercise and the conflict resolution exercise from your No More Team Drama book. And oh my goodness, people are actually going to each other and they're having those conversations. And so all of those are kind of the micro success stories that are happening every day in organizations who actually take the time to put in the work and do some of the things that we've talked about today.
Got it. And I feel way better. Thank you for that. Yes. Okay. Got it. Now that makes sense. Good deal. And I'm glad you brought up pulling the weed, because yes, ultimately, yes, do not continue to just let the weed fester just because. That was a great story you shared about the manager who was afraid, who was the reason that they were still there. So if the person listening right now or watching only did one, I mean, you and I I feel like we've shared a lot of really good little nuggets, and I hope you listening took a couple of notes. And if you didn't, by the way, writing things down is what helps you remember things. So if we said something in here and you didn't write it down and you just thought, oh, that's a really good idea, please make a note in your phone or write it down somewhere so you can get it. But for the person who's listening, Joe, if they were going to do one thing make sure they just did this one thing after listening to you and I go on and on like we have, what would you say?
I hope this isn't too ethereal of an answer because we've talked about some very specific and tactical behaviors today.
Okay.
But my one thing would be to take ownership, to say that the quality of the interactions that are taking place on my team are determined by what we expect and permit. And that drama is not something that is happening to us. Drama is something that happens as a byproduct of choices, right? The choice to not spend enough time on staff development, the choice to not spend enough time as an organization investing in leadership development and teaching our leaders how to nurture teamwork. It's a choice of choosing to retain that problematic person who is a weed in the garden. So that's the one. It's taking ownership and saying, I can put in the time and the attention and the work to create a culture and create a team where people treat each other with dignity and respect all the time, or not. It's not something that's happening to me.
Yep. It's the stop playing the victim. If you're facing drama, you are not the victim. You are in the driver's seat. So drive. Don't just, oh gosh, woe is me. This is happening to me. Look at all this terrible things that's happening. Like, oh my gosh, It's your workplace. Own it. Do it. It's your team.
And the caveat there for the manager listening right now who is frustrated that says, Joe, Brian, I've been doing that. I've been trying to pull the weed for 3 years, but HR won't let me, or their boss's boss won't let me. So they heard what you and I just said, and they're throwing up their hands and they're saying, I've tried to take ownership. I've tried to talk to my team. I've tried to do those exercises. I've tried to pull the weeds. And so my advice to that person is to just keep trying, keep documenting, keep being an updater, be the mirror that reflects up to the rest of the organization what the actual real cost of the bad behavior is, and keep asking, like, hey, am I just supposed to keep living with this? I'm going to keep documenting it. At some point, the right people are going to start to take notice and you'll get some help.
Absolutely. And or if that's the reaction you're having and it's really that bad, you also have permission to look for another job.
That's right.
Or something like that. Maybe you are the weed. That's a horrible thing to say. I can't believe I just said it. But like, seriously, not that you're the bad weed, but like sometimes if all you have is weeds, you got to like start over or something.
And you got to go transplant yourself someplace else.
Right. And and if that's the case, then maybe all it is weeds and you're the one flower and it's time for you to go find more flowers. Like maybe that's a thing.
And I have coached leaders on the side of the stage about that conversation when hearing their story. And we know that right now, the number one reason that people leave a job is because they believe that the change will improve their quality of life. And now for some people, that's an upgrade in money. And some people, that's an upgrade in commute or an upgrade in fulfilling work or an upgrade in a less toxic workplace. And if I'm a leader and I have done everything I can to do all of the things that we've spent the last hour talking about, and I have no hope or proof whatsoever that anything is going to change, then making a move is an act of self-preservation and might be the absolute right choice.
True story. Well, Joe, here's what I love. I love that you wrote this book on no more team drama. And I love that I love the level of thought and very specific, just the examples and the stuff that you've shared has been awesome because I feel like it's really practical. Oftentimes when I talk to authors, sometimes they like to get really cerebral and it's all about the research. And I know that you have that side. And I know that Joe probably could be the cerebral guy with me. But at the same time, I feel like we got really actionable on what can you really do? Because it's not just, if you're going through this right now, you don't need us to tell you that it's a problem. You need to deal with the problem. So I feel like we did that today. And Joe, I love that you brought what you brought today was awesome. So thanks for being here.
My absolute pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And for those folks who want to keep in touch with you, where should they go?
My name is my website, Joe Mull, MULL.com. Lots of resources and information there. Thanks for asking.
You got it. And I'll include the links for his will be in your episode notes as well. So you can check those out there. And for you tuning in, please think about someone in your life who struggles with drama in the workplace. I immediately thought of two people that I know when I was thinking about this and talking about this. So maybe it's a colleague, or maybe it's a friend, or maybe it might be someone you haven't talked to in a while, but that was drama from when you left that workplace 2 times ago or whatever. Would you share this episode specifically with them? Because I know Joe and I would love to know that first, that our conversation helped someone who needed to hear this, but also we'd love to be your excuse to reconnect with that person that you haven't talked with in a while. So send them that link. If you want more of the productivity insights beyond just this podcast, my email subscribers get access to everything I create. So come join the email list if you haven't already. And I love sharing Productivity Gladiator with you, because together, these productivity skills are going to change your life. That's a wrap.
Productivity Gladiator.